First Chronicles 3. These are the sons of David, born to him in Hebron. David, of course, is the son of Jesse, who we read about a while ago, in chapter 2, verse 12. Now we're into David, the son of Jesse. These are the sons of David, born to him in Hebron. His first batch of sons. The firstborn was Amnon. These are the important ones. Most of the ones that come later are just random people that we never find anything out about except for Solomon. These are the ones that are actually going to be factors. And we read about that, of course, in Samuel, but this first batch of sons are the ones who are actually going to factor into the narrative, for the most part, except for Solomon. Solomon comes along later. The firstborn was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. The second, Daniel, the son of Abigail of Carmel. Remember Abigail? That's the one that woman he met on his way out to fight her husband, and she begged for her husband's life and convinced David not to kill him. He only died 2 days later. Now, this person, Daniel, is never really mentioned again, so he probably died as a child or in infancy. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. Those characters all play important roles in the narrative as we read about in Samuel. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ephraim, by his wife, Eglah. These six were born to David in Hebron, where he reigned 7 years and 6 months. David reigned in Jerusalem 33 years, and these are the children born to him there: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. These four were by Bathsheba, daughter of Amiel. Remember Bathsheba? So she was more than just Solomon's mother. She had at least 4 children. Now, she had a child, of course, a product of the rape of Bathsheba by David. That child died. I don't know if that child was ever given a name. Probably not. So I don't think that child is one of these 4. I doubt they named a child who was going to die in a few days anyway. So in addition to that one that she had as a product of David's rape of her, she had 4 more, including Solomon. These 4 were by Bathsheba, daughter of Amiel. There was also Ibhar, Elushua, Eliphalet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet, 9 in all. All these were the sons of David, besides his sons by his concubines. He had a lot of sons. And Tamar was their sister. Now, the Chronicler doesn't go into any of that. Now, we've already read this narrative, but the Chronicler presents David and most of the kings in as positive a light as possible. So he does not. This is the only mention we have of Bathsheba in Chronicles. We do not cover the rape of Bathsheba. We do not cover the rape of Tamar. We do not cover Absalom's rebellion or Adonijah's rebellion, for that matter. Amnon's evil. The Chronicler is not ignoring that. He mentions it here briefly by referring to their names. And he knows that people can read about that in Samuel, so he's presenting a different side of the story. Of course, we've already covered that when we read the rest of Chronicles, but David liked the ladies, and the ladies liked him. That was actually one of his flaws. One of David's character flaws was that he was a ladies' man, probably too much so. And that caused him all kinds of problems. All these wives, all these kids, all these wives, that doesn't really help. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't really help. I believe that's one of the things that God allowed mankind to discover on its own. He never forbade polygamous relationships. He never forbade people from having, or men at least, from having more than one wife. He did not encourage it. It was not his recommendation. It was not his design for human relationships. He never forbade it. He never wrote a law against it. But it isn't ideal, and I think God allowed mankind to discover through hard experience that these sorts of arrangements just don't actually work. He never forbade it. He never gave a law saying don't do this. But clearly it wasn't his pattern or his design for marriage or for human relationships. And when we have tried to do it over the years, it always ends up causing problems. And I think that was a lesson that he allowed us to learn through the hard way. Solomon's son was Rehoboam. Now these are the kings here. So we had David, and then we had Solomon mentioned. Now we're going to have the kings of Judah mentioned here. Solomon's son was Rehoboam. His son was Abijah, and Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Joash, Amaziah, Azariah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, and Josiah. These names should be familiar. These are the kings of Judah. We read all about them when we read the books of Kings and Chronicles. And the prophet books, because the prophets came along during their reigns too. At least some of them. The sons of Josiah. Johanan the firstborn. Jehoiakim, remember him, he was one of the wicked ones, the second son. Zedekiah the third, he was actually the last king of Judah. And Shallum the fourth. So Josiah had 4 sons, 3 of whom would end up being kings at different times. Johanan apparently died early. He's a firstborn son, but we never read about him in the narratives. So, like David's son Daniel to Abigail, First Samuel devotes an entire chapter to David meeting this Abigail woman. So you tend to think then that something significant is going to come out of that, but no, he does. Okay, Abigail apparently does have a son for him, Daniel, but we never hear him mentioned, and presumably he died young, too young to be a factor. But otherwise, he was David's second son, and he would have been a contender for who was going to become a king. But we never read about it. All the others did. Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah were all vying for the throne. We never read about Daniel doing that, even though he was the second son. And First Samuel devoted an entire chapter to describing how David met this woman who bore this second son. So you tend to think that something important is going to come out of that, but nothing does. At least not in terms of the sonship. Now, that woman Abigail and the other woman Ahinoam are part of David's, that's part of the reason why David missed the final battle that Saul had on Mount Gilboa when Saul and his sons died, because he was on a rescue mission to save his wives and the other communities, because David and his men were living with the Philistines, and they were told to leave because they didn't want the Philistines were concerned that David would betray them and fight against them. What are you doing, Cat? I don't like this. What are you doing? So they told him to leave, and he did, and then he went on a raid, and then when he came back, he found that his camp, his city had been attacked, and his women and children had been stolen. I don't know what you're doing, Cat. I don't like this. And Ahinoam and Abigail were his wives at that time, and they were captured and taken prisoner by the Amalekites. So that's part of what that leads to, but it doesn't lead to Abigail bearing him a son that becomes king. Bathsheba ends up doing that, and Abigail's son doesn't even become a contender for the kingship, so he probably died early. Well, anyway, Josiah apparently had a firstborn son. Cat, what are you doing? Who must have died early, because his other 3 sons all become king. And yet we don't read about Johanan at all in the narratives of that time. And Shallum is Jehoahaz. So the first of the, so he's, oh no, this is just not good. Jehoahaz was the one that the people made king. Okay, I've got to do something, because this cat is going to destroy everything in sight. Jehoahaz was the one the people made king after Josiah died. And the king of Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, was not happy about that for whatever the reason. So he took Jehoahaz captive to Egypt, and we never read about him again. He died in Egypt in captivity someday. And then made Jehoiakim king. Jehoiakim ended up dying under unglorious circumstances, although it's never properly explained exactly how. And then, so Zedekiah was the last king, was made the last son, and the third son was made the last king of Judah, and he was the one in charge when the city finally fell. The successors of Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, his son. So he became king too for 3 months, and so he was actually in Zedekiah. So Jeconiah was actually the last rightful living member of the royal line of descendancy. I had these cats like everywhere, and I'm just so nervous because they got fire in their eyes and they want to cause trouble. That's why I'm so distracted. I've given up on trying to put them away during these videos because it just doesn't work. So I have to let them roam free, and they're just, we could be in for a total disaster here in a moment. The descendants of Jeconiah the captive. So this was the royal line as it continued. Jeconiah was taken prisoner. He stayed in prison in Babylon. He was finally set free by Nebuchadnezzar's son, Evil Merodach, when he became king in 562 BC or whatever. And Jeconiah would have been like in his mid to late 50s by then. I don't know how much longer he lived after that. But he had sons, okay, and those sons are as follows. Shealtiel, his son, Malkaram, Hadiah, Shenazar. Now later on, when we get to Ezra, we're going to read about a guy called Sheshbazzar. And people think that Sheshbazzar and this Shenazar are the same dude. We'll talk about that more when we get to Ezra. Jechemiah, Hoshama, and Nedabiah, the sons of Pedaiah. Zerubabbel and Shemaiah. Zerubabbel is important. He's going to be our next guy. He would be king, but he's not going to be king because the kingship is gone. But he is in the line of kings. We'll read about him in Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah. The sons of Zerubabbel, Mersallum and Hananiah. Shelomoth was their sister. There were also 5 others, probably from a different woman, who knows. Hashubah, Ohel, Berechiah, Hasadiah, and Jeshob-Hesed, the descendants of Hanariah. Now Zerubbabel comes along after the exile. He's the governor of the city when they go back, and he's there when they rebuild the temple. And we'll read about that in Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah. Okay, so these are his sons now. So now we're getting down from the late 500s BC into the 400s BC. The descendants of Hananiah, Pelatiah and Jeshiah, and the sons of Raphiah, of Arman, of Obadiah, and of Shechaniah. The descendants of Shechaniah, Shemaiah and his sons. The descendants of Shechaniah, Shemaiah and his sons. It's kind of worded awkwardly. Hattush, Igal, Bariah, Neriah, and Shaphat. 6 in all. There's only 5 mentioned, so I'm guessing Shemaiah is one of the 6. It's kind of worded strangely. The sons of Neriah, Elionah, Hilkiah, and Ezrakam, 3 in all. The sons of Elionah, Hodaviah, Eliashib, Peliah, Akub, Johanan, Deliah, and Anani, 7 in all. So that's the latest generation in the book of Chronicles. We take the royal line from David all the way down to the current generation that Ezra or whoever it is writing in, which is right here at the end of chapter 3. So this would probably be somewhere in the late 400s BC, 425 or somewhere around there. Ezra came into Jerusalem in the year 458 BC. He may have been a young man. He probably was a young man. I don't know how young. He was a priest, and it says that he was a priest, so apparently he was at least 30, because he had to be at least 30 to be a fully trained priest. So if he was 30 in 458 BC, at least 30, let's say he was exactly 30 in 458 BC, then this is probably being written 30 or so years afterwards, which is possible. He could have written this in his late 60s or above. That's assuming, of course, that he was exactly 30 in 458 BC, and he was probably a little older than that, although it's hard to say how much older. But he could have written this in his 70s. 35 or 40 years later, it's possible. That's about where we leave off. We leave off the genealogies in about the 420s or so BC. So it could have been Ezra, or it could have been maybe a disciple of Ezra, who took Ezra's materials and finished the book. I just don't know. The descendants... Oh, let's go ahead and start a new video here.